I would think that anybody who could climb the world's tallest buildings would have to be considered some sort of a legend. I would like to think that his climbing the building was definitely a tribute to the spirit, to the essence, to the heroism that is Spider-Man.
Dan was camping in the Las Vegas desert in 1980 when a deadly fire changed his life forever.
The biggest turning point in my life, without a doubt, was the MGM fire.
Dan watched in horror as the MGM Hotel in Las Vegas burned out of control, with many hotel guests still trapped inside.
The ladders are only going up like to the 10th, 12th floor. And the helicopters are hovering above, and they're getting to the people who are on the balconies, on the very top floors, and the roof. But there were all these people that were trapped in the middle.
84 people died in the blaze. Thinking there was a better way to attempt high-rise rescues, the next day Dan paid a visit to the fire chief.
And he says, have you ever climbed a building? Well, until you do climb a building, don't come into my office and try telling me how to rescue people in a high-rise.
That conversation gave Dan an idea.
I never thought about climbing one until that moment. And at that moment, I thought, you know, I'm going to prove this guy wrong. I'm going to go climb a building. But I didn't have a clue how I was going to do it.
Moved and inspired by a tragic high-rise hotel fire, 25-year-old Dan Goodwin prepared in 1981 to undertake a series of daring vertical ascents. An experienced rock climber, Dan was determined to climb tall buildings. The question was how.
I started walking around looking at all the buildings. Most of them you just look at and you just don't have a clue how you're going to get up them.
Inspired by the way window glazers used suction cups, Dan began modifying suction cups so they'd stick to buildings.
So I started redesigning the suction cup and modifying it completely so that I could climb with them.
Dan practiced climbing the walls of Las Vegas buildings under cover of night. And after 6 months of practice, he was ready for the main event, the tallest building in the world. It was a friend that suggested Dan wear a Spider-Man costume.
Because do you have any idea how many kids love Spider-Man?
The fact that he wore a Spider-Man costume, I guess, is kind of flattering. I mean, Spider-Man has sort of become part of America's mythos.
So if you wear a Spider-Man suit and you climb this building, what are they going to do to you?
Dan packed up his equipment and headed for Chicago in May of 1981.
When I got to Chicago, it was pouring rain. And I stayed across the street from the Sears Tower, and with a pair of binoculars studied the security guards.
After staking out the Sears Tower for 4 days, on May 25th, Dan began his ascent of the 110-story Chicago landmark.
Right from that moment on, I knew I was in for an experience that I might not live through.
Using his suction cups, Dan had crawled nearly a quarter of the way up the building. As Chicagoans looked up in open-mouthed wonder, news of the Sears Tower climber spread from coast to coast.
I got a call one day. Somebody said there's some guy in Chicago wearing a Spider-Man suit climbing buildings.
It seemed like the whole world, or at least half of the United States, had stopped because it was all live on television.
I heard that some guy had climbed the Sears Tower, and they didn't even give the name, but I knew it was him.
Finally, 7.5 hours after he began his tremendous stunt, Dan Goodwin reached the man-made summit of the Earth.
When I got to the top, the policemen were throwing me up in the air. They loved it.
Dan was charged with disorderly conduct, but thanks to Sears, the hero of the moment got off with only a $35 fine.
It is evident that Dan Goodwin has captured the imagination of the public as well as Sears.
Rhapsodizing reporters gave Dan a nickname that would follow him throughout his life.
They were calling me, "Hey, Spider-Man," and I said, "Hey, I'm not Spider-Man. Then we'll call you SpiderDan."
Anybody who can climb the world's biggest building, who can wear a Spider-Man costume, and who calls himself SpiderDan, that is such a feast for the media that he would have to become famous.